Many people consider the artist to be merely a myth, and it makes sense because when you hear the stories you would think that something that is so deadly, brutal and destructive cannot possibly exist, and it all just must be a figment of someone's imagination. But those that have gone the distance to research the artist and the associated stories know for certain that he's real, and under the same group of researchers, his way of fighting has netted him the nickname of Blink Once and You're Dead. Why? Well, it's simple. Give the artist a single second to do what he wants and whatever he's fighting dies. This is because the artist is proficient and an expert in using a quick-oriented sword type that excels at precise timing and outmaneuvering opponents, namely the Rapier and the Estoc. The artist has completely mastered the thrusting sword weapon class to a T and knows exactly how and where to strike his opponents to completely break, destroy and eliminate them. Not only that, since his trademark is that his enemies get coated in all kinds of different colors on the battlefield, almost like an artist's color palette. Don't get it twisted, the artist is not painting on his opponents, the artist is applying every imaginable disease and horrifying internally destructive status effect on his enemies to crumble the very being and foundation of his enemies. The artist is the late game and evolved version of my cold-blooded flame build, or rather the continuation of my get OP early guide for the bandit that focused on proccing Frostbite and bleed infinitely while using twin blades and different types of Ashes of Wars. If you're starting a new playthrough, make sure to watch that video as well because it is the strongest bleed and frost build, or a build that focuses on multiple status effects that you can also make at the start of the game and is a god tier build for the early and mid game. However, if you thought that proccing 2 status effects at the same time infinitely was crazy, well, wait till you see the rest of this video. This video continues the same trend of applying multiple status effects at once, but it takes it to a whole new level. Because we are now in the late game, and we can apply every single main status effect in Elden Ring on our enemies while doing crazy physical damage with the actual blade of the swords that we will use at the same time. So the main status effects in Elden Ring are Poison, Scarlet Rot, Frostbite and Bleed. And I call these the main status effects because these 4 status effects are the ones you can commonly find in the game on weapons and actually consistently apply on a lot of enemies in the game. The same is not true for Madness or Deadlight, as most enemies in the game are in fact immune to these status effects. So these 2 status effects do not make the cut to be a part of this build. And finally, Sleep is more of a setup status effect. It doesn't really fit this build, as this build is extremely fast paced, and by the time you would get the sleep going to start killing your opponents, you would have already killed your opponents. It also just doesn't fit from a practical point to include it on a weapon, as it's only found on 2 weapons in the entire game, of which one is a torch. If you really want to include it, however, for the roleplay and to have the feeling that you've included all status effects, I would rather just use sleep pots as an additional tool, as they are quite easy to make, but like I said, it's definitely not necessary. However, applying the 4 main status effects in the game all at once is definitely extremely destructive and fun, and the most powerful and best way to achieve this is through using the Thrusting Sword Weapon class. Because in the Thrusting Sword Weapon class there is an extremely powerful Rapier that goes by the name of Antspur Rapier, and you'll want to get this Rapier as soon as possible for this build. You can pick up the Antspur Rapier right next to the shaded castle. Outside of this place to the west, there will be a hostile NPC that if you kill will drop the Antspur Rapier for you. And this thing is OP, amazing, a monster, whatever positive word you want to use or can find in the book you want to go with it. Antspur Rapier comes with innate Scarlet Rot, but it's also a weapon that you can customize, so you can actually change its affinities. This is great because it gives you the opportunity to either give it the Bleed affinity with the Poisonous Mist Ash of War, or the Poison affinity with Seppuku to get a second and third status effect going on this sword. Now, which option you want to go with is really up to preference. You can do either option, as the scaling distributions are exactly the same either way. My personal preference, however, is to infuse it with the Poisonous Mist Ash of War while giving it the Bleed affinity, Because Poisonous Mist actually has an interactive component, you can hit your opponents with your sword while doing it, and it also releases a Poisonous Mist. Surprise surprise, who would have thought with that name? And when the enemy is standing in the mist, it will already start building up poison on them. It's actually really easy to inflict poison on your enemies with this mist at the very start of a fight, before ever even hitting them, so this route definitely gets my preference. Also, most importantly, your blade itself can now also inflict poison on your enemies when you actually hit them with it, as it's coated with poison. Meanwhile, going the other route with Seppuku is a lot more boring in my opinion, as Seppuku is just a buff Ash of War that you'll always have to preemptively cast, and you can't actually do anything with the Ash of War itself in combat. Make sure to apply the Ash of War with the right affinity on your Antspur Rapier, and your Antspur Rapier will now be able to apply 3 different status effects on your enemies. But this imposes a new question: where do we get the Frostbite from to complete the build? Well, in this video we will continue the trend of part 1 and use pretty much the same stats, and that means that this build is in its core an Arcane Dexterity build. In addition to that, the Antspur Rapier actually scales the hardest with Dexterity, so Dexterity is our primary damaging stat, and we will want to use another Rapier or a Thrusting Sword that actually also scales really well with Dexterity. Now, before I get into the answer to this huge mystery that has boggled the mind of every Elden Ring expert for years, make sure to give the video a like and also definitely subscribe if you still haven't, or I will find you. So which Thrusting Sword could it possibly be? Well, let's just jump immediately to the conclusion. The best sword to pair up with the Antspur Rapier to get Frostbite going and maximize your raw damage output is going to be the Estoc. The Estoc is the best stock. It scales the hardest with Dexterity compared to all other Thrusting Swords in the game, so it harmonizes well with the Antspur Rapier. Thanks to its high scaling with Dexterity, the Estoc ends up also being the Thrusting Sword with the highest AR for every level basically. So definitely get the Estoc. It is also a very easy to get weapon. You can buy it for cheap from a merchant in Lernia right here. When you have done so, put the cold affinity on it and pair it up with the Chilling Mist Ash of War. Chilling Mist is basically the frost equivalent of Poisonous Mist, so you want to get it for all the same reasons. In addition to all those reasons, the Estoc already actually gets a pretty high frost build up value when infused with the cold affinity, but Chilling Mist will coat your weapon and increase this number even more, making it very easy to proc Frostbite very early on in the fight. Now that you have both weapons, you definitely want to put the Antspur Rapier in your main hand. When power stancing, you have a really nice moveset when using dual Thrusting Swords. You basically attack a lot of times within a very short period of time, which is exactly why the artist just needs one opening to decimate his opponents, and you pretty much launch the sword at your opponents while doing so, giving you good range and giving you the opportunity to play it pretty safe. Now, the reason why you want to put the Antspur Rapier in your main hand is because when power stancing you get this nice 4-hit lunge in quick succession combo with your main hand weapon. Considering the Antspur Rapier is the sword that has 3 different status effects going, you'll build Rot, Poison and Bleed very quickly this way. And the Estoc is perfect for your other hand because its frost buildup is already high, especially when using Chilling Mist, and it's very easy to proc Frostbite quickly. So you definitely don't need that 4-hit combo for the Estoc. Now, before you go on your own adventure to completely destroy everything, let's go over the setup for this build. So for gear, the only piece you really need is the white mask, as it will increase all your attack power by 10% for 20 seconds every time you proc bleed, and you'll proc bleed a lot with this build. For the other 3 pieces, I just went with style for this build and equipped the Briar set. This set synergizes well with the Antspur Rapier in your main hand in terms of looks and shows everyone that you have a good sense of fashion. However, if you want to go for more defense and don't care about fashion in this case, I would just try to get the armor with the highest defensive stats that you can find. Try to go above the 50 poise threshold while staying in the medium load category, and you'll have some more survivability. Regarding talismans, you definitely need the Lord of Blood's Exaltation and the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation talismans. These 2 talismans are absolutely staples in this build. Both will be incredible as you proc Bleed and Poison or Scarlet Rot respectively all the time, so you will pretty much always have the increase to your damage output going. And these 2 talismans do in fact stack, and that does mean that your damage output is going to be crazy. For the other talisman slots, it's definitely nice to run both Millicent's Prosthesis as well as Rotten Winged Sword Insignia. As you know, our moveset allows us to hit our enemies a lot of times within a very short period of time, so these talismans reach their maximum potential and buff your damage with the highest tier possible very quickly, and you can just continue the entire fight with that buff going as well. Now you can't technically get both in one playthrough, so you'll have to find someone to trade you the one you didn't get from your own playthrough. But if you can only choose one, then definitely go for the Millicent's prosthesis in this case, as it will also raise our dexterity with 5 points in addition. And considering dexterity is our primary damage stat, those 5 points are really nice. And then just replace the rotten winged sword insignia with its little brother, the winged sword insignia, as it's really only a few percentages difference and it's a great talisman as well. If you want to replace the rotten winged sword insignia with something more defensive, then alternatively I would recommend the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman. This talisman will help you out with your survivability and is a great option if you want to go the defensive route. For the flask, you definitely want to get the Thorny Crack tier. It is the crystal tier equivalent to the Rotten Winged Sword insignia and Millicent prosthesis. It does exactly the same thing with even higher percentages, and thus we definitely want it for the same reasons. With this crystal tier in our flask and our talismans, every single increase to our damage output is going to stack, and it's going to make your damage output absolutely bonkers. For the other crystal tier, I would get the dexterity node, as this is a hybrid build, so we don't fully soft cap on dexterity with our stats if we stay around level 125. But with this crystal tier and Millicent's prosthesis, we get 15 points of dexterity extra, and we get very close to fully soft capping on dexterity in a hybrid build. If you want something that has less to do with damage but has more utility, then I would instead get the green burst crystal tier. As we will be lunging our swords a lot, it is definitely going to cost stamina, and if you feel like you want something to help you out with that, then the green burst crystal tier does wonders, as it will make you recover your stamina faster. For stats, I will keep it short in this video because I already went very deep into stats in part 1, pretty much going over all of it for every level bracket and going over every detail and nuance. So I would just recommend you to watch that video. I'll put the link in the description for that and you'll know everything you want to know. The only change I would recommend is to remove 5 points from Mind that I showed in that video and put it in Dexterity instead, as the Ashes of Wars we now use are quite cheap and you only really need to cast them once per battle usually, and these thrusting swords also scale harder with Dexterity compared to the Twin Blades, so I don't think you need as much Mind as with the Twin Blade Bleed Frost build. Now you know everything you want to know about the artist, you know how he operates, you know everything about his equipment, the strategies, the fighting style, and most importantly that he's extremely dangerous and powerful. When you play as the artist and you get into combat, you really just want to start the power stancing sequence as soon as possible. Attacking with both swords at the same time is going to be very lethal, and doing so will quickly let you build up poison, scarlet rot, bleed and frostbite on your enemies, and this combination of deadly status effects is just too powerful. Now starting right from the moment you enter combat up to the first few seconds of you hitting your opponent, you will activate all the buffs that your gear, talismans and flask give you, resulting into you doing so much damage it is not even funny. This build is also very easy to play with, especially if you struggle in the late game. This is your calling, because if you don't like being in melee range, all you really need to do is apply Scarlet Rot on your enemies and it is a death sentence for them. So if for some reason you don't want to fight anymore during the fight, just make sure to hit your opponents a few times, get Scarlet Rot in combination with poison going on your enemy, stay away, get some popcorn and some drinks, put on Pornhub or Netflix or whatever you watch, and just watch your opponent slowly die. However, it's definitely a lot more fun to get the timing right and just go all in, go berserk and kill your enemies off within seconds. It goes so fast because while Scarlet Rot and Poison gradually consume the flesh of your opponents, your bleed, frostbite and raw damage will just melt the HP bar completely at the same time, resulting into this unique experience of your enemy just being overflown with all kinds of different damage and just have absolutely zero chance against you. Now I hear you thinking, what about this motherfucker? Well, thanks to our investment in dexterity and nearly soft capping on it in a hybrid build like this and picking the right weapon to use in combination with the Antspur Rapier, we also just have a very good physical damage base and foundation, so even if you're fighting something particularly annoying that is immune to everything, the steel of the swords will do the job perfectly fine as well. Thankfully, most enemies in the game, however, aren't immune to every status effect in existence. It's pretty much the opposite actually. Pretty much everything in the game will be extremely susceptible to you and will really just die within seconds. Meet the artist. This build is art and the definition of OP, and it's a lot of fun. Have fun playing with it, and I also hope you enjoyed watching the video. If you did, definitely don't forget to give the video a like, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you're the first to get notified when I upload something. And finally, let me know your thoughts in the comments.